Okay. Good evening. We're ready. It is 8:40. We're learning tonight Maseches Pesachim Daf Ches, and we're starting in the middle of Daf Zayin Amud Beis, right about halfway down. It starts at the beginning of the line Dekule Alma. Over the last half of an Amud, we have been discussing the halachos of whether or not to make a bracha that says le or al, le va'er chametz or al bi'or chametz. The Gemara just concluded in the previous line, the Hilchasa, and the way that we of course paskin is that we make the bracha of al bi'or chametz. The reason why we're allowed to be lenient is because there are some understandings in the Amoraim that the words of al bi'or chametz could still be forward-looking. So here, the Gemara takes a jump off of this topic into a general discussion about the brachos that we make by mitzvos. This is an idea that I think Ari raised on Shabbos, and the idea is as follows. Halfway down, Zayin Amud Beis. Tekule alma miha, everyone agrees, me ikara ba'inin livruche. The bracha is always made first before we do the ma'aseh. This we know, right? We're told, for example, to hold our talis up over our shoulders, make the bracha, and then over our head, around our shoulders, and atifas yishmeim. We don't put on the talis first. First, we make a bracha, and then that's the appropriate way to do it. So we're going to learn some of the actual sources of this. So says the Gemara, Minala, how do we know that that's true? That mehikara ba'inun livruche, that first we have to make a bracha before we do the mitzvah. Halfway down, Zayin Amud Beis. Damar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Kol ha-mitzvos mevarech alein over la'asyasan. All mitzvos, we make the bracha over la'asyasan. We can already probably, just off the cuff, think of exceptions. We know that Friday night candles, for example, women would light the candles first and then cover their eyes and make the bracha. And then when they reveal their eyes, they're being megala. Now they're getting hana from the lights. Now they're getting hana from the candle. That's an exception to the rule. But we'll see some other exceptions in the Gemara as well. But first, let's get to the sources as to how Shmuel knew this. How did Shmuel know that all brachos are supposed to be prior to the mitzvah itself? My mashma tehai over lishna deaktume. How do we know that Shmuel's language of over is a lashon of before? How do we know that? So we'll see a number of psukim that use the language of over. Each one was used in its own context to mean before. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Krava Yaratz Achi Moatz Derech HaKikar Vaya'avor Sakushi, and he went in front of, namely before. That's one proof that we know that brachos are before. The word over la'asyasan means before. The bracha first. Abai Amar Mehacha V'hu Over Lifnehem, a different pasuk that speaks that was by I think that's by Yaakov. That's when Yaakov went to go see Esau. V'baisem Mehacha Vaya'avor. The pasuk says, "Vayavor malkam lifneim ve'Hashem berosham." Vayavor here too it means in front of. So the Gemara brings three text proofs as to how we know that we have to make brachos over la'asyasan. Then the Gemara says a fascinating line. Be Rav Amre. Rav says, just interesting to note that Rav and Shmuel were contemporaries and they argued a lot. They had a lot of machlokos together. What did Rav say? Shmuel's right, but with two exceptions. Chutz min hatvila ve'hashofar, except for mikvah and for shofar. Now, Rashi and Tosfos here debate what type of mikvah we're talking about here. But before we even get there, let's go to what the Gemara thinks is pasha. The Gemara says as follows. Bishlama tvila, I understand, says the Gemara, questioning Rav. Rav says the exceptions to the rule are tvila and shofar. Namely, Rav assumes the bracha by tvila and shofar go after the act. After shofar, you make a bracha. After tvila, we know. When a woman goes to the mikvah, she's in the water, she makes a bracha, and then she finishes going in the water. That's true. But says the Gemara here, Bishlama tvila, I could understand when it comes to tvila, de'akati gavra lo chazi. The person is not yet chazi. He's not yet fit to make a bracha. What scenario are we talking about? Take a look at Tosfos, Dibra Hamaskil al Hatvila, a few inches above where we are. Tosfos writes, Omer Rabbeinu Chanan al B'Shem Agon. He quotes a gon, and he says, Dafka b'tfilas ger. Specifically, we're talking about someone who's going through a conversion process. Dilo chazi kodem tvila. Before he goes under the water, he's a goyim. Dilo matzi l'meimar v'tzivanu. He can't say the words v'tzivanu. That's not allowed. You're a goy. You're not allowed to say the v'tzivanu, so you can't make the bracha. De'akati nachrihu. Aval sha'ar chai v'tvila kegon bal keri v'chayotze bo muter levarech. However, says Tosfos in the name of the Rabbeinu Chananel, that if a person were to be a bal keri and they were going to the mikvah for those purposes, so then they could make the bracha before. Now, of course, this is going back to a time when people made a bracha for being a bal keri. Nowadays, men don't make a bracha when they go to the mikvah, even for bal keri, because this was Takanas Ezra. We learned about this in Maseches Shabbos. Takanas Ezra was a takana where Ezra said that a person could not learn Torah or daven if they have seen zera, if they've emitted any zera, and they had to go to the mikvah first. And there it was a mitzvah d'Rabbanan to do so they would make a bracha. So Tosfos says, by that we assume that you are chazi. We assume that you are worthy to make a bracha, even though you're a bal keri. So you make a bracha before you go in the water. But take a look at Rashi, because Rashi understands this case the exact opposite of Tosfos. Rashi is about halfway down in the Rashis. Dibur hamaskal de'akati gabra lo chazi. What does he say the example is? Tosfos said the example was a ger. What does Rashi say? Could go in tefillas bal keri. He says exactly the opposite of Tosfos. Tosfos said a bal keri is allowed to make a bracha. Rashi says you're not allowed to make a bracha. The gzeira of the takana of takanas Ezra, that a person who's a bal keri, if they've seen any zera, that they have to go to the mikvah. Rashi says that pshat in that is even to go to the mikvah, you can't make a bracha before you get under the water. Not allowed. So big machlokes in regards to how we understand the tefillas keri. It doesn't make a difference nowadays because that's been retracted. That was one of the gzeras she'ein hatzibur yichol and lamod ba. That was one of the examples of a gzera that was too difficult to place on the people. And we're not talking about a generation. We're part of the Yeridas Hadoros. We're talking about a great generation who had Ezra as their leader. Even in that generation, they canceled this takana. It was too difficult to maintain. Either way, the Gemara says, either according to Tosfos talking about a ger or Rashi talking about a bal keri, bishlama tvila, that person is not chazi. Ela shofar my taima. I understand why Rav would say that the case of the ger, I got it, I understand. But the case of the shofar, why would you not make the bracha before? Now, v'chi tema, if you want to say mishum dilma mikalkelatkia, maybe the Baal Tokeh is going to do a terrible job. He won't be able to get the sounds out. So we have like a safek bracha. And therefore, maybe we should only make the bracha after a certain number of kolos. Says the Gemara, if that's true, there's plenty of mitzvos where we should be concerned about kilkul. Number one, afilu shchita, and as well, umila nami. Maybe by shchita you won't cut the rov kana v'veshet, you won't cut enough to make the animal kosher. Your bracha is a bracha levatala. Maybe by mila you won't remove enough skin, and if you don't remove enough skin, then the baby is still an orel and he needs another bris. You have to make a new bracha l'chora, right? If the baby, I did a circumcision for a family recently, and they said, can you check our older child, a child that I did not circumcise? He looked totally like an orel, like nothing had happened at all. He wasn't Jewish, so he didn't need a procedure, but halachically speaking, had he been a Yid, the kid would be an orel. He hasn't had a bris yet. So maybe we should say, what's your concern about the tkiyos? Maybe the Baal Tokeh is going to just not be able to be Tokeya. But if that's true, then shchita and mila are other examples we should have been concerned about kilkul. So clearly we know that's not the case. Ella, Amar Rav Chizda corrects the statement of Rav. Really, it's chutz min hatfila bilvad itmar. We're only excluding tefillah. That's the only exception to the rule codified here in the Gemara by Rav. Tanya Nami Hachi, a brisa to support this idea, Taval ve'ala, person goes into the mikvah and comes out of the mikvah. Ba'aliyaso omer baruch asher kedushav b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu ala tefillah. Beautiful raya to Rav that we see that that's the exception to the rule, that when a person is going into the mikvah, they cannot yet make a bracha. They're not chazi to make a bracha. Again, machlokes Tosfos Rashi. Do we say it's because he's a ger, or do we say even if it's because he's a bal keri, according to Rashi? Either way, tefillah is the exception and not the rule. Why doesn't the Gemara here speak about by a woman, by a lakas neros? That's a great question. Okay, 2 dots. We're about 3/4 of the way down, about 15, 20 lines from the bottom of the page. Up until now, we've been focusing pretty much on orla, arbas, arbodkin, asachametz, and now we're getting to the next words, or haner. What does it mean, le'or haner? What are the Mari Makomos for that? So it says the Gemara, le'or haner minohanimili. How do you know? What are the Mari Makomos to support our Mishnah that says that when you do bdikas chametz on the night of the 14th of Nisan, that you have to use a candle? Amar Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says we have a long string of Mari Makomos to learn from. Lamadnu mitzia mi mitzia. We learned one pasuk had the word mitzia, and so did another one. And in that second one, it had the word chipus, mitzia mi chipus. And in that third pasuk, it also had the word chipus, v'chipus mi chipus, v'chipus mi neros, v'neros mi ner. A whole string of connected words that will indicate to us kind of like a multi-layered hekesh, a multi-layered comparison where one pasuk has the same word as another. And if pasuk A has A and B, and then pasuk B has B, so that connects it, and then B and C, right? You're connecting it's like a chain link fence here. So we're connecting everything. So now let's go through the psukim. Mitzia mi mitzia ksiv hacha shivas yamim sar lo yimatze bevatechem. There we see the word yimatze. Then the next pasuk, 2 lines before the middle width lines, ksiv hasam vaychapes. There's chipus, which is going to be the next one. Vaychapes begadol hechelu vakaton kila v'yimatze. Umetzia mechipus didei, both in the same pasuk they have chipus and metzia, and that pasuk that we just read. The chipus mineros, where do we see a pasuk that has the word chipus and neros to connect us to the previous pasuk? That's here in this pasuk, Dechsiv, and we're going to spend some time focusing on this particular pasuk. This pasuk reads, Ve'esahi achapeses Yerushalayim baneros. And then Veneros Miner, the last connection from Neros to get to the singular Ner, which pasuk has that? Dichsiv Ner Elokim Nishmas Adam Chofes Kol Chadrei Batim. Kol Chadrei Batim. So there we see this multi-layered connection from word to word, from pasuk to make sure that we know this is the Mari Makom according to the Gemara as to how we know it's Leor Haner. So this is a very sophisticated and complex Mari Makom, requires Perush, which we don't have time for. But suffice it to say that Rav Chizda is highlighting for us some type of hekesh. Again, it's an uncommon form to learn from. Normally, you would say it's Gzeirah Shava, Asya, this word from that word. Here it's multi-layered, requires research as to why it's so sophisticated. We'll see an example on the top of the page, maybe why he did it this way. We're in the second of the middle width lines with another possible answer as to how we know. Ner Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel. Leila Yodalid Bod Kenes Achamis or Haner. We have a Tosefta. We have a Brisa. Actually, we learned this earlier. The Brisa says in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, Leila Yodalid, that on the night of Yodalid, that we check Laor Haner. This is a corollary to our Mishnah. It's not replacing our Mishnah, just an addition to our Mishnah. Says the Gemara. And this is all part of the Brisa. This is a common phrase you'll see in the Gemara, that we have a proof, but it's not a strong proof. So even though it's not a mukhrach, slam dunk proof, but zecher ledavar, there's at least a mentioning here of sorts that's kind of hinting to the idea. How does that work out? What's the zecher ledavar? Says the Gemara, Shenemar Shiva Siyamim Sor Lo Yimatzeh. Pasuk number 1, the Rabbi Shmuel quotes. Pasuk number 2, Va'omer Vaychapes Bagadol Hechel Vakaton Kila. Pasuk number 2. That's another pasuk that speaks about chipus. Pasuk number 3, Va'omer Vayisayach Chapes Yisraelim Baneros. And pasuk number 4, V'omer Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam Chofes. Doesn't this sound a lot like the previous answer of Rav Chizda? Rav Chizda seemed to have been basing himself on the Tosefta. Why not quote the Tosefta? So, okay, we have to dig into the Rishonim here, which would be time consuming, but Rav Chizda had a need to separate out from the Brisa. But here, in this Brisa of Rabbi Shmuel, the Gemara is bothered. And we learned about this the other day. Whenever you have an answer where it brings 2, 3, 4 psukim, the Gemara is always going to ask why. If it doesn't, it should bother you. So here the Gemara does its job. 4 lines from the bottom, Zayin and Beis. Mai ve'omer. Why do you keep adding extra psukim? Just say what we need to say. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Good. You get Ner. Why? What's with all the psukim? So says the Gemara, it was really for an ancillary reason. What we were concerned about was a misunderstanding of the following pasuk. V'chitema, if you might have thought that hi be'esahi, when the pasuk says be'esahi, that pasuk speaks about, this is a pasuk in Tzfanya. This is a pasuk that talks about Hashem, who's going to do a sweep of the city to see how we Jews are doing. So maybe Havamina, we might have thought, but v'chitema hai ba'isai kula, this was a leniency who dekama rachmana, that Hashem is going to be lenient. What was Hashem going to say as he checks Yerushalayim? I'm not going to check Yerushalayim with a torch, a very, very bright light, which would show me, as a homily, all of the averus of the Yidden, all of the big and small problems. Ella b'nahora d'shrag, I'm going to use a candle. D'zutar nahora tfei. Therefore, da'avon rabba mishtakach. Yeah, the candle will show me the big things, but maybe v'avon zutar lo mishtakach. I might have had a havamina that when you read this pasuk that you assume that the avuka was better than the ner. The avuka would shed more light. We'll learn later today why a torch doesn't shed more light. And we were concerned within Rabbi Yishmael that maybe we'd misunderstand the pasuk in Tzfanya. Therefore, Toshma, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. We had to add other psukim in order to make sure we understood that pasuk properly. Last Rashi on the page, Toshma, Mehaikra dibedika ma'al yasahi. That with a candle, not with a torch. The candle's better. The torch is worse, and we'll see why again on the Amud Aleph, on Ches Aleph, we'll see why that's true. That with a candle, you can see kol chadrei vatan, all of the hearts of the lave, all of the inner thinkings of the person, because that's what was happening. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm going to look and see how Yerushalayim is. What am I going to use as my tool? A ner. I'm going to use a candle. Why not a torch? Because a ner, it's better to be chofes kol chadrei vatan, and that's why we had to add the extra psukim.
He says.
That was the Havamina. The Chitema that, Kamash Malan, that's wrong. That's what Rashi says. That Rashi speaks out your idea. Rashi, the second Rashi beforehand, kulahu, 5 lines from the bottom. To akil rachmana gabi Yerushalayim lo nivdike be'avuka. I would have thought that maybe ela be'or katan hilkach lo yalfinan chavit. Maybe we shouldn't have used this pasuk this way. Tashma, that's not true. That it's a ner. The ner is ideal. The ner is the best, and the torch is not. And we're going to get into that right now, because on the very last line of Zayin Amud Beis, the Gemara is presenting us with a Tosefta. Historically speaking, the Toseftas were organized a little bit after Rav Yehuda Nasi. Rav Yehuda Nasi died in 220, so we can presume at around the year 200, give or take, that the Mishnayos, as we know them, were being organized. A little bit later, Bar Kapara and Levi organized the Toseftas. So it's not that they didn't exist before then, because they knew them all Baal Peh. And not all of them were codified, because the Mishnah was the highest level, and then the Brises and Toseftas were considered a little bit less chashuv, both tremendously chashuv, all of them were chashuv, but they were a little bit less chashuv. So we're going to try and figure out how this all works within our Mishnah. But when we learn this Tosefta, we need to recognize it's a corollary to our Mishnah. Let's see what the Tosefta says. Tanu Rabban on last line. In Bodkin lo or hachama, you cannot use sunlight to check for chametz. Below or halavana, you cannot use moonlight. Below le'or ha'avuka, we're going to get into this as well. You can't use a torch. Ella le'or haner. Turning to the top of Chesed Aleph. Why? Ipnei she'or haner yafeh lebdika. Rashi lekamei mefaresh my ma'al yusa me'avuka. We'll soon see the blessings of a candle. We'll see 4 answers as to why the ner is better than the avuka. And again, the Tosefta is still continuing. And again, here too, we don't have a slam dunk proof that it has to be an air, but we have a zecher l'davar. We have an idea that's kind of a remez. Says the Gemara, "Shenemar shivas yamim sor le'matze bevatechem ve'omer vaychapes begadol hechel ve'omer vayisei yachapes es Yerushalayim b'nei ros ve'omer ner Hashem nishmas adam chopes chol chadrei vaten." So we see that all of the approaches of Chizda, Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, and this Tosefta all use the same Mari Makomos, but none of them are like a Raya Brura. They're all a zecher l'davar. Nevertheless, it's certainly the case. Now the Gemara is going to analyze this Tosefta piece by piece. So what did the Tosefta say? We're on the 6th line, 7th line. It says the Gemara, Hi or hachama hechidami. What's the case with the sunlight? Where is it that you restrict sunlight? Inema bechatzer, you're standing in the middle of your field outside, the sun's beating down. Says the Gemara, Ha'amar Rava chatzer ina tzricha b'dika. You don't need to do b'dikas chametz in your chatzer. Why? The ravens, the birds. The birds are there. They're going to eat everything. You don't have to do b'dikas chametz. It's totally putter. You do not, even if you have a meal out there, you don't have to worry about it. We have a din like this by Hilchos Shabbos. Fascinating halacha. Let's say that a person throws down chicken feed that's actually seeds that can grow on Shabbos. Is that the isser of planting? Oh, it depends how many birds you have. If you put out an amount of food, seeds that the birds could finish before 3 days, before the seeds would implant in the ground, that's just feeding your animals. That's mutter. But if it's too much that the birds can't feed that amount of food, then you just plant it on Shabbos Isser Doraisa. We have to make sure that the food, if you have a whole factory of bread and it's not edible in that time frame, of course it's going to be usher. But here, what are we talking about in a regular chatzar? Says Rava, we're talking about a case where the amount of food is mibnei she'ah or ben mitzvim, they're going to eat everything. So again, when the Tosefta says that that the sun cannot be used, what is he talking about? It can't be a chatzar, because chatzar has birds. So that's not the prohibition of the Tosefta. So says the Gemara, it must be Ella be'achsadra. An achsadra, no PTSD, but this is an Eruvin word. In Eruvin, we spoke about these 4 poles with a top. It was kind of like a sheltered little space, like a gazebo. So says the Gemara, maybe we're not talking about a chatzar. That's not what the Tosefta was forbidding, because there's no need to do bdika there. Maybe it's an achsadra, but there's no restriction on sun. There, you don't even need a candle. Sunlight's totally fine. The light that's going to shine in is enough for bdika. Yes, you have to do bdika there. The birds can't see the food. It's covered. So it may not get eaten. So therefore you have to do bdika. But you don't need a candle. You can use sunlight. So we're back to our question. Why is the Tosefta limiting sunlight? Answers the Gemara. Lo tzricha le'aruba debecheder. We're talking about someone who has a sunroof in their house. So the sun is shining in. Says the Gemara still, udehecha, what's the mitzias of the case? If it's directly under, if you're going to be benefiting from the light of the sunlight, that's the achsadra. So it says the Gemara, Ella, it must be litzadin. It can't be directly under the roof. Can't be, because that's then you can use the sunlight. Ella litzadin, the sun comes down, but we're talking about checking to the sides, by the cabinets, in the spaces where it may be a little bit more difficult to find the chametz. If the sun's beating down straight on the aruba, in that sunlight is mutter. That's like the achsadra. So what's the case of the Tosefta? Looking back at the bottom of Zayin Amud Beis, we never would have thought this 3 minutes ago. It said in Boken Lo Or Hachama. What was that talking about? Sun that goes into a house in the shade next to the sun. That's what the Tosefta was forbidding. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. The avuka lo, moving on to another part of the Tosefta, you said an avuka can't be used? Really? We have an agadata that seems to say that you can. We're learning from an agadata? Yes, we're learning from an agadata. Says the Gemara. What does the pasuk mean when it says v'nogak ortia karnai miyado lo v'sham chavyon uzo? The glowing of the light, v'nogal ortia karnaim miyado lo. The brightness is from your hands. V'sham chavyon uzo. That's your strength. What does this pasuk mean? Lemat tzadikim domim bifnei ashchina. How do we compare? Hints the pasuk. How do we compare a tzaddik kaviyachol to a Karesh Baruch Hu? The way we make the comparison is simple. Kiner bifnei avuka. The ner is the lesser, and of course kaviyachol, the avuka is the greater. So what do we see from the hashkafa of the Gemara? We see when you compare a tzaddik kaviyachol to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's ner to avuka. The avuka is better than the ner. So we see from this Gemara, which is clearly an agadic reference, that we have to use this in a halachic lens. Just think about this. This is very uncommon what we're seeing right now. We're asking a halachic question from an agadata. We are saying that just like a tzaddik is comparable to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, ner to an avuka, therefore the Tosefta here should allow for an avuka. The avuka is better. Not only that, continues the Gemara, Velmar Rava, avuka le'avdala misveh min amuvchar. Come on, the avuka is much better than a ner. And we have two proofs for it. We have the agadic answer, and of course we have the halachic answer. We know that we should use a torch. We should use a multi-wick candle for Havdalah. Says the Gemara, there's 4 reasons why the Tosefta forbids using an avuka and prefers a ner. Number 1, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, we're 1/3 of the way down to Ches Amud Aleph. Number 1, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Ze yachol lachniso l'chorn v'listakin, v'ze enu yachol lachniso l'chorn v'listakin. Says the Tosefta, why is an avuka not allowed in the name of Rav Yitzchak? Because the candle you can bring close to in between the cabinet and the fridge. But a whole torch? No way. Too dangerous. That's number 1. Number 2, when you have a small candle in front of you, you can see beyond the candle and utilize the light. But when you have a torch in front of you, it's so bright you can't see beyond it. That's answer number 2. Answer number 3, Rav Papa Amar Hai Ba'is, one of them induces fear. The torch can be scary, just a big flame. The Hai Lo Ba'is, and a candle, 1 wick, simple, piece of cake, that's easy. There's no fear there. Answer number 4, Ravina Amar Hai Mashach Nahora, one of them draws up the wax or the oil smoothly. This is a language from Maseches Shabbos. Also, the Hai Miktafik Tufe, the other one is flickers a lot. The torch flickers a lot. So 4 answers. Going back to our question, why does the Tosefta on the bottom of Zayin Amud Beis say you're not allowed to use an avuka? We have 2 beautiful arguments against that. The Medrash says that tzaddik to a Kadosh Baruch Hu is kaviyachol ner to an avuka, and also by Havdalah we prefer an avuka. Says the Gemara 4 answers. The 4 answers just listed here. That's why the Tosefta does not allow to use an avuka. 2 dots halfway down. We said in our Mishnah, next part of our Mishnah, we said in any place where you don't bring chametz, kol makom, says the Gemara, she'ein machnisim bo chametz, ein tzarich bedika. So says the Gemara, we have a rule. We have a rule that any time, basically the Mishnah says kol makom, kol anything, and whenever we're using the word all, it always is intending to include something specific. We just don't always know what it is. So asks the Gemara, kol makom lasu yemai. When our Mishnah uses this vast, all-inclusive language of kol makom, what is it coming to include? Our Mishnah is La'asui Hadatana Rabbanan, another Tosefta. And this Tosefta, we're going to spend some time on today as well. We already knocked off 1 Tosefta. Here we're going to learn 1 more. So what does the Tosefta say here? Chorei ba'is ha'elyonim v'hatachtonim. If you have holes in your wall that are high off the ground and very low to the ground, exempt from bdikas chametz. The gag hayitzia, certain types of sloped roofs. The gag hamigdal, a tower roof, a very steep roof. The refes habakar, a place where there are animals. The lulin, chicken coops. Umasbein, a place where there's going to be tevin, where there's going to be straw. The otzaros yayin, places where they store wine. The otzaros shemen, places where they store oil. Ein tzrichin bedika. All of these notes ein tzarich bedika. Pretty fascinating because the end of our Mishnah speaks about otzaros yayin. Right? In the Martef, that's what it's talking about, is wine. So the Gemara is bothered by that. We're going to just remember this case. We spoke about the Chorei Beis Elyonim, and we spoke about Otzros Yain and Otzros Shem. And this first sheet of the Tanakh and the Tosefta, we're going to question soon. Sheet number 2, halfway down, Rashbad Gomer, Mita HaCholekes Besocha Baisu Mafsekes. If you have a bed, I'll simplify the case for now because the rest is not relevant. If you have a bed that has space underneath it, Tzricha bedika, you have to do bedikas chametz. I went to check on one of my kids last night. Chips Ahoy, open, in bed, mamish, a kizais, every bite. That's not just a reason to do bedikas chametz, but it's also not good for bugs. So I'm like, please get that out of the room. But bedikas chametz for sure. There's space under the bed. We're totally going to find food there for sure. That's Rashbag. Rashbag says that's a place where people put stuff. Therefore, it's tzricha bedika. End of the Tosefta. Says the Gemara, or Minhu, we have two conflicting Tanaic sources. We have the Tosefta that we just learned, and we have the following Tanaic source. Or Minhu, we have the following Brisa. 2 lines before the wide lines. Chor shebein adam lechavero. We share a property. There's a hole that goes between my yard wall into your yard wall. So says the Gemara, what's the din? Ze bodek ad makom sheyado magas. V'ze bodek ad makom sheyado magas. We each reach into the wall as far as we can. We take whatever chametz is out. So says the Gemara, that's the din v'asha'ar, whatever you can't reach. Let's say my arm's length is 1.5 feet, so is yours. So that's 3 feet, mine arm and yours. But it's a 5-foot thing. The middle 2 feet, we can't reach it. Just mevatlu believe, you can do bittul, no problem. First of the long lines are Rashbag Omer, mita hacholekes besoch habayis. If you have a bed and ve'etzim ve'avanim sturim tachteha, you have some stuff neatly organized underneath. Umaseches, but there's still some space underneath. Eina tzricha b'dika. So there's 2 contradictions between the Tosefta we just learned and this new Brisa. And says the Gemara, Kasha mita amita. First Rashbag and the Tosefta said that you have to do bdika under the bed. Then Rashbag said in the Brisa, you don't have to do stira number 1. And also Kasha chor nachorin. Also, the Tosefta started out by saying that when there's a space high on the wall, you don't have to check. If it's low on the wall, you don't have to check. Then the new Brisa says you have to check for chorin on the wall. I got to stick my arm until I get all as far in as I can. So a double stira. So answers the Gemara as follows: Chorin achorin. Says the Gemara, Kasha mita amita, Kasha chorin achorin. A double question about mita, a stira in the Rashbag, and in regards to the chorin, a stira in the Tanakama. Answers the Gemara 3 lines in on the wide lines. Chorin lo kasha. There is no contradiction between the Tosefta, which says that you do not have to do bdika by the chorin and the walls, by the holes that are high and low. Whereas in the Brisa, it says you do have to check. Hello, Kasha, why is it not a question? In the Tosefta, it said they were very high and very low. Those are the ones that are really not so usable. However, the next Brisa is talking about holes in the wall that are at a usable location. And therefore, it's more likely you would have put chametz there. And that's why there's no machlokes there. The Brisa, the Tosefta is talking about the high and low locations that are not so usable. And the Brisa was talking about middle height locations that are much more usable. What about mita amita? Says the Gemara, there too lo kasha. Hadimidlia, hadimitzai. Rashi here explains this. One is a little bit higher off the ground. It's a raised bed, a little bit more easy to use. And the other one's a little bit lower. Mitatoy means lower to the ground. Good. Now this Tosefta also listed a couple of other things which seem not to make sense with other Brisas. 4 lines down, wide lines. Ve'otras yain and tzarch badika. If you have a wine cellar, you don't have to do bdikas chametz. First of all, we just know our Mishnah is talking about that, so we for sure have to ask that question. But the Gemara doesn't even go there. V'atanya otros yain tzarich badika, otros shemen ein tzarich badika. We have an explicit brisa that an otra of yain does require badika. Says the Gemara, why is it that one time in the Tosefta it says that otros yain don't require badika? Answers the Gemara, when it says that you do require badika, that's because you're mistapik. You finished a bottle of wine. Oh, the chashuv guest, let me go back down into the cellar. I'm going to go get another good bottle of wine for you. And you have a piece of bread in your hand while you're walking. You're mistapek. You're continuing the wine drinking from that cellar. Of course, you're going to have to do bdika there. And in the other case, of course, the brisa that says that there's no obligation for bdika in a wine cellar, that's the person who doesn't have to go, who never goes down into the wine cellar. Fine. You always have enough in your fridge. You never have to go downstairs. Then the room downstairs doesn't need checking. That's the difference between the brisas. Says the Gemara, Hachi Shemen Nami. But people used to eat oil with bread all the time. They would be dipping it in olive oil. Some people still do that now. Add a little garlic powder, whatever it is. It's beautiful, a great dip. But says the Gemara, what about shemen? People are mistapek b'shemen. People eat food with shemen all the time. Says the Gemara, you're right, but it's a different style of eating than wine. Shemen yesh kevel achila. Yayin ein kevel l'shtia. You're going to bring out a bottle of olive oil on the table. You're not likely to finish it. But wine, you can knock off a bunch of bottles of wine in the same meal. So the Gemara says, because the style of the way we eat these foods, because they're different, so therefore we treat them differently. No one's drinking a whole 750 milliliters of oil in a meal. I hope not. Wine, maybe. That's very possible. That's why the Gemara makes a distinction. Shemen yesh keva le'achila, yayin ein keva l'shtia. People can always drink more. Tani Rebbi Chia. Asu otros shechar bebavel ki otros yayin be'eretz Yisrael b'mistape. When it came to drinking beer in Bavel, that was equivalent to the otros yayin in Eretz Yisrael, in that people would, in fact, utilize those rooms during their meal. We ran out of beer. We're going to go down to the cellar and get more beer. That was in Bavel. So they were just this is like a cultural reference that the Gemara is making. Like, just want to let you know that the way people use wine cellars in Eretz Yisrael is the way we use beer cellars in Bavel. Just like it was like the practical analogy of the day. So the Gemara had to make sure that everybody knew what they were talking about. Some of the Meforshim point out, hey, sheikhar is made from barley. That's chametz. You can't drink chametz. So the Meforshim say, you're right. It must have been beer that was made from another source. It can't be beer that was made from chametz. Says the Gemara, 12 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Chizda, Bei Dagim. What about someone who has fish in their house? They have a collection of fish and they're planning to eat it on Pesach. Bei Dagim, if there's a storage of fish, Ein Tzarich B'dika, V'hatanya Tzrichim B'dika, Machlokes in the Tanaim. We have two sources in the Tanaim. Some say you have to check the place where the fish are stored, and some say you don't. Says the Gemara, Lokasha, V'rav Revei Habazutre. One is talking about these large, 10-pound fish, whatever they are. Of course, those are, that's a lot of food. You go to a bris, they have this massive fish there. People are picking at it. It serves the whole room. However, habazutra, you're eating tiny pieces of fish, you're eating herring. It's easy to run out. So of course, if the room is a herring room, then you have to go check that room because you're going to be mistape. You're going to say, we ran out of gefilte fish. You're going to go back in the room downstairs. You're going to be holding a piece of bread. You have to check. So that's how the Gemara makes a distinction between the brises that say you're required to check for certain kinds of fish and not for others. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Bei Milche Ube Kire, the rooms where they would store salt and the rooms where they would store wax. Sarich Badika, wax, of course, they were using these for lights. They didn't have electricity. So those rooms were regular places where you'd be going in there. Any room that you regularly go to with chametz in hand, you're obligated to check. In my old house, we had a crawl space. I would never bring chametz in that place. I hated going in there. I only had to go in there when I needed to. And it was never with chametz. There's no mitzvah for Badika there. I went there. That's not the point. It's when you're being mistapek, when you go to get something with chametz in hand. You don't eat in a nasty crawl space that's filled with spiders. That's just not my... If you do that, I guess, if that's your thing, that's great. Then you have to check for chametz. But it's a very logical. This all is very logical. It's not like there's not like a unique chiddush of an idea for everything. It's very practical. Wherever you bring food, that's where you have to check. Amar Papa Beit Sive, a place where you would store wood for fire. Of course, you'd have to check. Uve Tamre, if there was a place where you were storing dates. So then Tzarich Badika. Tana. We have a brisa questioning an idea that we learned earlier, and it said that you are not obligated to insert your hand into choron v'stakin to check for chametz mipnei hasakana. The words mipnei hasakana are part of the brisa, so they're very important words. What does mipnei hasakana mean? My sakana. And we'll see a couple of answers here. We're going to throw out the first quick answer, but we'll keep the second, and then we have to figure out what the third one means as well. If you're scared about spiders and bugs and scorpions, if that's what you're scared of, then then how'd you use it in the first place? If you're so scared to stick your hand in there because of scorpions, then you for sure didn't use the space. So it can't be that the sakana is scorpions, because who would put their bread there? That's not normal. You would not use a place that's scary. So done. That's not our concern. The Gemara rejects that. Lo tzricha de nafal. We're talking about a place where the place collapsed. And these are choron who stuck in the building fell, but I used to have chametz in there. The building fell. So then do I have to kind of look through the rubble? So says the Gemara, no, mipnei hasakana, you don't have to. Inafal, I don't need you to tell me that. That's a brisa. I don't need you to tell me that. We have a mishnah. If a building falls on top of chametz, harehu kimavur. It's as if it's already been burnt. So why would I have a brisa to tell me that the case of choron u'stakin has been a building fell when I have another mishnah that says if the building falls, you don't have to b'dika? That's duplicative. I don't need that at all. Therefore, says the Gemara, you're right. There's a difference between these two cases. There's two different types of buildings that fall. Hasam she'ena kelev yachol l'chapes acharav. One is that the building has so much rubble that the kelev, the dog, cannot access that space. And the second is hacha. Our case is kelev yachol l'chapes acharav. Here, our case where we say that it's mipnei hasakana is where the dog is able to get to it. We still say mipnei hasakana. You're not required. That's what our Mishnah is talking about. V'ha'amar Rabbi Lazar, famous sugya in Shas. I know Rabbi Robinson gave a share on this last year. Shluchei mitzvah eina nizakin. How can you tell me you're not chayiv in b'dikas chametz b'bnei sakana? It's a fundamental question on the brisa. There is no sakana. You're doing a mitzvah. Shluchei mitzvah eina nizakin. No one can get hurt. Answers the Gemara. Amar Ravashi, Shema Tova lo machat. Maybe you lost something small, a needle, a small little trinket that you want to find. Ve'asi liyuna basra. And while you're doing Bdikas Chametz, you have in your mind, I'm going to look for two things: Bdikas Chametz and that thing that I dropped in the rubble. So we're concerned that you may have a split mindset. Unbelievable. Even though you're doing a mitzvah, but if your brain is partially elsewhere, you're not protected anymore by shluchei mitzvah and nizakin. It's crazy. Says Gemara, you're still doing a mitzvah. After all, bottom line, chesed aleph, haomer selazul tzedakah, a person's giving tzedakah, mitzvah. Why are they giving it? I'm not giving it only for the poor person. I have an ulterior motive also. I want to give tzedakah, but I want the tzedakah tatzil limaves. I want all the benefits. So says the Gemara, harezet tzadik gamur. That person has done nothing wrong. Okay, you have two motives. So what? They're all wonderful. It's back. So what's our question? How can you tell me that you've lost shluchei mitzvah and nizakin just because you're also looking for another thing? You're still doing the mitzvah of Bdikas Chametz. That still should be protected under shluchei mitzvah and nizakin. Says the Gemara, you're absolutely right. It's okay to have two motivations. What was our concern here? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Mishum Sakan. Skipped a line. Dilma, top line. Dilma basar de badak asiluni basra. First, you do your bdikas chametz, and then afterwards, you're like, well, while I'm here, I'm going to do something else. Then the scorpion might bite you, because then it's shluchei mitzvah and nizakin. Good. So that's answer number one. Is that why does the Tosefta say that you're exempt from chor nusakin? You don't have to stick your hand into rubble. We thought initially because sakana, says the Gemara, there's another possibility too. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Mishum Sakanas HaNachrim. We were concerned about the Nachrim, and we'll see soon about kshafim, about them putting a curse on us, some type of witchcraft. Uplimuhi, and this is the sheet of Plima, who was a Tana. What did he say? The Tanya, Chor Shebein Yehudi le'Armai. If you have a hole in the wall between a Yehudi and an Armai, a Jew and a non-Jew. The halacha is bodek ad makom sheyado magas v'ashar mevat lo b'libo. The Tanakama says you extend your hand into the break in the wall for as far as you're able to. Plimo amar kol atzmo eno bodek m'nesakana. He's masking to our Tosefta. Why is he masking to our Tosefta? Why does he agree? My sakana. What are you worried about? If you're concerned about kshafim, inema sakanas kshafim ki ishtamesh hechi ishtamesh. What would if you were concerned about him with kshafim when you do bdikas chametz, then how did you use the space in the first place? You walked over to it. Oh no, he's going to be a bal kishuv. He would have thought that anytime you would have used it. In other words, you cannot possibly bring chametz there. That's not, the Maseches doesn't work. They're mutually exclusive. You can't say you're worried about kshafim when you check the space and you still have chametz there. That's a stira. The Gemara says it's not possible. So therefore, what must have been hasam? No. When was he actually using the space without bringing about the concern of kishuv from his neighbor? Hasam ki ishtamesh yamama v'nahora v'lamasikadai. There's regular usage, but all of a sudden, on the 14th of Nisan at night, the Jew walks out. Hachalelia, it's night out. Vishraga, who he walks out with a candle and a feather and the brown paper bag, and there's 10 pieces of chametz everywhere. The guy's like, something weird's going on here. Now I'm going to put a curse on this person. That's what Plimo was talking about. So he says here, hacha, in this case, le'el yavishragu masika daite. That's what we're concerned about the guy. I asks the Gemara, v'ha'amar Rabbi Elazar, shluchei mitzvah eino nizakin. I don't understand. The guy, what about shluchei mitzvah? He's doing a mitzvah of bdikas chametz. Why should I be concerned about that? He should be totally protected. So says the Gemara, a famous exclusion to the rule of shluchei mitzvah eino nizakin, and the Gemara says as follows. We're about 10 lines down. Heicha d'shchiach hezeka shayni. Where the risk is a prevalent risk, so then the rules of shluchei mitzvah eino nizakin don't apply. Done. There's no protection there. What is considered significant risk? Some poskim bring this down to a halachic percentage, a number of percentage of concern. Is it 7, 8, 9, 10%, whatever the discussion is? So real shaila in the poskim. Can you bungee jump in halacha? Can you go skydiving? What are the percentages of risk? They're super low. What does low mean? Is it equally dangerous to cross the street? How do we define these things? Everything that has risk has risk. We have to measure what's allowed and what's not. So the Gemara says, Heicha d'shchiach hezeka shayni shene'emar. We have a text proof from no greater than the Eibishter, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, gives us a proof himself that we embrace a concern when it's a real concern. What was the example? The pasuk in Shmuel. Pasuk says, "Shneimar vayomer Shmuel eiche lech v'shama Shaul v'haragani." Like, what am I going to do? I don't want to be in this case scenario. Shaul is going to think I'm going to try and kill him. What does Hashem say back? Vayomer Hashem. He doesn't say, "Don't worry." Shluchei mitzvah ein nizakin. What does he say? He says, "Eglas bakar tikach biyadecha." Why doesn't he say shluchei mitzvah? Because heicha d'shriach hazeka shiny. This is Hashem talking. There's no shluchei mitzvah in a case where the danger is shchiach. And because Shaul was dangerous in this case, and David had every right to be concerned. So therefore, Shmuel had every right to be concerned. So therefore, we were going to say that Eglas Bakar, you should come away so that you don't look like you're guilty. Next, we just answered the Tosefta. It helped because it didn't look like he was coming to kill him, which was the concern. It was circumventing Shaul's mindset. So the Gemara, we just answered the Tosefta. We were talking in the Tosefta. The Tosefta said that you don't have to go Choron Usakin because of Sakana. What was the Sakana? We saw two answers. We saw the answer of a building that had fallen and a dog may or may not have access to it. So we said you're Sakana. No, you don't have to do that. We were concerned that maybe one would follow the other. You do the mitzvah first and then look for something that was lost. So therefore, shluchei mitzvah wouldn't apply there. And the second answer was plimo, that we were afraid of kishuv. Good. We're about 10 lines down. 2 lines before the wider line. Says the Gemara. But oh my gosh, it's late. Bo minei me'Rab hani b'nei be'Rab dedaire bebaga. The Talmidim of Rab lived in a place. They lived in a relatively dangerous neighborhood. Ma'u lemeisei kadma v'chashocha lebe'Rab. Are they allowed to leave in the morning and come back at night? I mean, early in the morning, before sunrise and after dark. Rashi explains. Is there shluchei mitzvah in such a case? Says the Gemara. Amar lahu. Nesu alai al tzavari. They can show up and it's on me. Okay, that's nesu. That's showing up in the morning in the dark before they can come for shachris. They can come for vasikin. Nezel mai. What about on the other side? Can they go home? Amar lo yadan. He said, I don't know the answer. Then we have another statement from the Amoraim. Itmar Amar Rabbi Elazar shluchei mitzvah and nizakin lo bahalichasan v'lo b'chazirasan. He answers for both. Not only are you protected on the way there, but even after you did the mitzvah, you're protected on the way home. Oh, beautiful. Kiman. Who is this like? Says the Gemara, third line of the wide lines. Ki haitana, like the following brisa. Titanya, isi ben Yehuda Omer kilafisha amra Torah. The Torah says when a person is ola l'regel v'lo yachmod ish es arzecha, no one's going to want your land. You're going to leave your land totally free, and no one's going to take it. A promise from HaKadosh Baruch Hu by aliyah l'regel. So it says the Gemara, melamed. What do we learn from there? This is what the brisa writes. Shete parascha robe efer. Your animals are going to be grazing in the dirt. Ve'in chayim mazikta. No animals are going to attack them. And tarnagolas chamin akeres be'ashba. A tarnagolas is going to be stealing food from the garbage. Ve'in chulta mazikta. No animals will kill that animal. Uma ilu shedarka lazuk einan nizokin. The animals that are the predators in this case, HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises they won't attack. B'nei adam shein darkan lazuk alachas kama v'kama. Come on, the people are protected on the way back from aliyah l'regel. We're promised that the animals that are predatorial won't be predatorial. And the Kal V'chomer is just like they who are predatorial. So we're going to be fine. No human beings are going to attack us. We're going to be protected. So it says Gemara, Ein li'ela b'halicha. How do we know it's on the way back? I inserted those words, but that's not actually what the words say. Ein li'ela b'halicha. The Chazar minayin. How do I know that even on the way back? A mafurish pasuk Talmud Lomar. The pasuk says, Ufanisa v'boker v'halachta le'ohalecha. What is the early part of the pasuk say? I'll read the whole thing. Uvishalta ve'achalta, you'll do your korban pesach and you'll eat bechabura b'makom asher yivchar Hashem elokecha. And then when you're done, ufanisa baboker ve'halachta lo'alecha, then you'll go home. That's a pasuk melamed. What does the pasuk teach us? Halfway down, shetelech v'timsa ohalecha b'shalom. You'll get home. Everything's going to be fine. You're protected. Shluchei mitzvah in both directions. So then ask the Gemara a brilliant question. If you're already telling me you have protection on the way home, if I'm already protected after, I've already done the mitzvah on my way home. So if I already have protection on the way home from shluchei mitzvah and nizakim, why do you already promised me that I'm going to be fine after the mitzvah pasha, although of course they're going to be protected on the way to the mitzvah. That's obvious. Says the Gemara, Liched Rav Ami, Domer Rav Ami, Kol Adam Shesh Lo Karka Ola LeRegel, V'She'ein Lo Karka Ein Ola LeRegel. He's explaining one of the psukim that we saw above, that when a person does not have karka, they have no mitzvah of aliyah LeRegel. Beautiful marsha on the back. No time because we only have 7 minutes till Mar. I don't know.
I think so.
I presume.
A few blogs ago we had a Yehuda was in the other city.
Oh, what was it called?
And they were asking the question
By the Armenian. The Armenian, the Arma, the guy who was eating. Oh yeah,
Right, and
yeah.
He said
Yep, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira.
Correct.
So why is he there? He said because maybe he didn't know mine, and that's why he didn't go.
Oh, that was Tosfos there. I think Tosfos might have said that answer. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a beautiful argument. Yeah, so we probably keep it. We should all own some property. Last figure for the night. Amar Rav Avin bar Rav Ada. Amar Rav Yitzchak mipnei ma ein peros ginos ar b'Yerushalayim. Beautiful sweet fruits. Why are these particular sweet fruits not here? They're up by the Kinneret. Why didn't the Kadosh Baruch Hu plant the beautiful sweet fruits in Yerushalayim? So the Gemara gives a beautiful answer to make sure that we stay l'shem shamayim. Because Kadesh shelo yihu ole regalim omrim. We were afraid that if someone was going to do aliyah l'regel, what were we concerned about? Ilmale lo alinu ela lechol peros ginos ar b'Yerushalayim dayenu. Oh, the fruits are so good. I'm afraid that maybe I'll say when I get to Yerushalayim dayenu, even if I wouldn't have brought the korban Pesach, nimtzeis aliyah shelo lishma. Kadosh Baruch Hu moved the Peiros Ginor, didn't move them, he planted them in another place so that we would not have something that is so good that may distract us from the beauty and the lishma aspect of Aliyah Regel. Similarly, Kayose ba'amar of Dusai bar Rabbi Yanai, Yibnei ma'in chametz v'Rabbi Yerushalayim. Why is it that the Chametz Veria are not in Yerushalayim? These warm, wonderful places of natural hot water. They had healing powers, as related in other Masechta. Says the Gemara, similar answer. We were concerned that people might have been Ola the Regel, Shalo Lishma, V'nimtzeis Aliyah, Shalo Lishma. They would have gone up for the wrong reasons. We're going to stop right here. Mr. Hashem will pick up tomorrow by Uvame Amru, Beis Shuras B'Martev, and we'll finish up the last section of this Mishnah that we started with on Daf Beis. Have a beautiful night.